Today we're featuring relevant information about Afghanistan. This time we're presenting David Markland, a member of stopwar.ca, who spoke recently in Vancouver. If you agree with his position on Afghanistan, please register your vote on nowpolling.ca. If you don't agree with his position on Afghanistan, please register your vote on nowpolling.ca. If you have a different opinion than the ones already listed on nowpolling.ca, please add your opinion in a few words and vote for it. Let your choice be counted, because that is what direct democracy is all about.
Also, delivery of aid, of course, is another arm of the project over there. Recent article in the CanWest, I believe, says that possibly as low as 5% of the aid money is actually getting to communities, and even that they qualified by saying that means that some wealthy person in the village gets it, and that's about as that's about as far as it goes. I've never seen a figure that low. Usually they say something like 15 to 20% of the money is actually getting there. So that's quite a low number, but probably believable considering how insecure things are there. Moving on to the elections, there's going to be a presidential election in August. Karzai is expected to win. What he has done to help ensure that, besides allying himself with a couple of the likely challengers, so eliminating their competition, what else he did, starting a couple years ago, he started this solidarity campaign, I think he called it, by appointing district officials all throughout the country, himself obviously, so they're beholden to him, and those officials are ostensibly to bring in insurgents, to cut deals, to get them to lay down their arms. But what was obvious from the start was that these people were going to be local political deal makers that would ensure that nobody would go against Karzai. So an illustration of that happened just last week, or earlier this week, where an Afghan journalist in, I read about this, an Afghan journalist in Kandahar city was at a poetry festival at the house of the governor of Kandahar, who is a former UBC prof, who recently went over there to his homeland to be governor of Kandahar. There was a poetry festival in his compound. The mayor of Kabul, also appointed by Karzai, he was there, saw this journalist giving out biographies of the one major rival to Karzai in the upcoming elections. His name's Ashraf Ghani. Claimed that's illegal because the campaign actually hasn't started yet, and so the security forces, I think it was the NDS, the National Director of Security, took the journalist and questioned him for a while. Then they kicked him out of the poetry festival along with his 10 friends, and then some thugs from security thugs came and beat them up out in public. Some police came by and watched. And they said that the governor himself had okayed this treatment of the journalist. The governor, again, is this UBC prof who's now governor of Kandahar. The governor was in town at the time, but apparently not at the poetry festival, and now he's back in Vancouver here. So that's just kind of a microcosm of the politics going on there. So it's been fairly widely reported that in Italy the government feels quite a lot of resistance from the population. France, the numbers are quite high. I think it's in the high 60% who are opposed to it, and of course they've added more soldiers in the past year, which was quite controversial. But as far as I've noted, as far as I've been able to tell, there's been no sort of successful anti-war movement in those places. I think the governments are sort of nipping that in the bud through public relations at least. So even when they're adding troops, they're placating the population. Yeah, and the numbers in Europe are closer to 60% opposed to the war, whereas in Canada they've kind of been pretty flat around like 55%. The latest one was I think 51%, but it was an online poll. Yeah, sorry, and even some of the Eastern European countries, I think it's as high as 80%. I think that's Poland, because they've got right now a trials going on in Poland that the Western media hasn't covered at all.
Well, thanks a lot, Dave.
Well, the polls on Afghanistan here show the slim majority opposed to the intervention, but doesn't seem to count for a great deal when it comes to very public and vocal opposition to the government's course. I think a big part of that is fatigue, a feeling that people have that it doesn't matter what they do, the government won't listen or pay attention. But I also think there's still a huge a fight to be won on the level of basic information that what is going on in Afghanistan is destructive to the Afghan people, leave alone to those in countries that are participating. And I think that there's still a great deal of information that needs to be put out. I think although I don't know if the polls have changed much in the last year, but I think two things that have changed is, one, the bias in the mainstream media is much more heavy now. A couple of years ago, the discussion you would typically hear on CBC is it proper or not that we be in Afghanistan? The discussion today is, what's the best way to win the war? That's the shift that's taken place, and fewer and fewer voices that are seriously questioning what's going on. And I think there continues to be a challenge that we face, anyone opposed to the war, and being able to convince people in Canada, and this would apply in any of the participating countries, that the people of Afghanistan are actually capable of running their own affairs.
They're de facto political parties. People can self-identify as being a member of a political party, but in the elections that they've had, you're not allowed to campaign as a party. They're not allowed to share funds. Basically, the U.S. imposed constitution after the Bonn Agreement of early 2002 set up the Afghan political process so that they would undercut political parties, largely because leftist political parties are some of the best organized ones. But it seems that one of the also another well-organized one is the Hizb Islami, the ICG, the International Crisis Group. They've done a series of reports on the political and the constitution in Afghanistan, how it came about, and they're quite good. And they point that out. And it's for people who think that it's possible to impose a democracy on a place like Afghanistan, they think that's a mistake. There should have been, provision made for political parties to organize as political parties.
I think we have to become a little more active on challenging the media, both nationally but even locally, because it's disturbing how less and less voices opposed to the war, and on principled grounds. Not opposed because we don't want Canadians to die or because Afghan is a hellhole of a place and who cares about it, but out of concern for the Afghan people itself. I think we need to put more time and energy into that, because you can make inroads, you can make progress if you put enough heat and provide enough information that will pique the interest of serious journalists. So the media shift. The other thing that's happened in the last year is we've had a big shift in politics. This whole course of fighting for a coalition government with the Liberal Party, which is a party of war in Afghanistan. And so the NDP has been prepared to sacrifice its opposition to the war in the interest of having a coalition government with the Liberals. Well, that coalition government idea is off the table right now, but we don't have right now a serious perspective as an anti-war movement to be able to establish a government in Ottawa that would actually be an anti-war government. And so that's, I think, been a considerable setback. The NDP now, as a result, speaks less than it did before about in opposition to the war in Afghanistan, and so there's some ground to be retaken there, and I don't know how we're going to do it, because even though the coalition government is off the table, the NDP seems to have also kept off the table its opposition to the war in Afghanistan. That's the price that's been paid. So